Hey, welcome to a new episode of SDV Coffee Talk. Just a small disclaimer from my side. Everything what I say here is my own opinion and has nothing to do with my employer. Today's topic is actually strategic partnerships in SDVs. And I have wonderful guests here. Brian, Marcus. Florian is my co-moderator. Actually, he's not really a guest, and Harta. Let's have a small intro, I would say. Brian, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the SDV, I would say, market for quite a while. NXP Semiconductors, retired last year, doing consulting within the SDV community. My company is Clear Catalyst Consulting. So I'm excited to join. I've been watching 18 episodes, I guess, and happy to be able to join this one. So look forward to the conversation.
Welcome. Marcus?
Shall I go next? Okay, I'm doing so. Hey, good afternoon, good morning. My name is Marcus. I'm with Vector now since more than 10 years, heading the business development and sales department. And I'm therefore involved in many of the SDV projects we're doing with all different kinds of OEMs and tier ones, and also building many of the partnerships. And therefore, I'm super happy to be here. And I'm looking forward for an exciting session.
Welcome, Marcus. And Partha. Go.
Hey, this is Partha Goswami. I'm originally from General Motors, spent about 28 years there and few years in Ford. At General Motors, I was a technology strategist focusing on new technology, including softwareization and software-defined vehicles. So I spent a number of years being the internal analyst. I've been an independent right now for a few years now, and also software-defined vehicle and its impact in the industry is one of my focus areas. We have done some work. As a matter of fact, both Brian and Fatih here, we have collaborated on reports for SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers. So very happy to be here. And the topic is very, very current and strategic, like Fatih said. So looking forward to the conversation.
Welcome. Florian, to complete,
I'm the guest who never left, I guess. But yeah. I've been in the automotive industry for over 20 years now, 6 of those years at Tesla, where we arguably created the SDV in 2012. And yeah, I haven't counted, but as Brian says, 18 episodes. There must be number 17 for me because I was missing one in the beginning. So
almost, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm really curious. It's and we have to mention this is the first time we spawn 4 time zones, so it's very interesting. First time for that. We're looking forward to the talk today.
Yeah. Cool. Then let's start. I would say. I mean, partnerships in strategic partnerships actually in SDV. What does it mean? I mean, can someone of you just define this? What is meant by strategic partnerships? What do you mean by if we say this? Brian, for example, we want to. Probably.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different levels, because if you look at the whole industry and the ecosystem, you're talking, semiconductor vendors, software vendors, tool vendors, tier ones, services, and OEMs, and all of those have unique, relationships and partnerships to solve problems. I think the key thing is not one company really. Maybe Tesla, maybe some examples, and even there, they still depend on other semiconductors.
Yes, absolutely.
None of them can really work on their own. They don't have all the pieces of the stack, from component all the way on the board, all the way to the cloud and all the software running in the cloud. So really, partnerships are really filling those needs of companies coming together, where it's 2 partners or multiple partners, to solve the massive complexity, technology diversity within the SDV market. So it's coming together to solve problems and create solutions.
One quick observation on that one. Traditionally, you have the OEM talking to the tier 1, the tier 1 to the tier 2, the tier 2 to the tier 3. It's getting a little bit more leveled out, and we see partnerships not only from one level directly to the other, but it's like a mixture where you suddenly have tier 3s, which are silicon suppliers, talking to OEMs, and we heard that partnerships in that area recently a lot. So that's very new I'm sure for all of us.
Yeah. So, in my mind, when you talk about strategic partnership, it's basically meaning something which is long-term or relative long-term, not something I just do for today. Okay, and so that's kind of number one. And second is what Florian, you just mentioned. Traditionally, in a tiered structure, a relationship with a quote unquote supplier or a vendor is very transactional.
Yeah.
I write a specification, I give it to you, you deliver the whatever you are delivering to that specification, and I pay you. Okay, that's all there is. I think that model is completely falling apart right now. It's more of a network rather than a kind of a hierarchical pyramid. So I think corporations are forced to look at specific relationships with specific players and potentially one specific area, and that's going to be a little bit more long term. So non-transactional and long term, those are the two key elements for strategic partnership.
Yeah, I agree. But I think this is maybe a good time for a little bit of nitpicking, right? Because if we are just talking about the typical supplier relationship, this is nothing I would, by definition, put under the term partnership. There's of course a certain change right now, whereas there's a, let's say, more collaborative way of working between OEMs and tiers.
Correct.
But here I tend to use more like the term collaboration, because it's still like some type of paid work. So usually when we are talking about partnerships, this is more in a way of, for example, with the semiconductors, because a partner might be a customer, but in most cases, he's just a multiplier. And therefore, this is really just to bring the ecosystem together, but it has more like a long-term relationship in order to strengthen both parties in this relationship. And of course, as Florian said, I mean, it's mixing all around, right? Even the term OEM, tier 1, tier 2, I mean, this is basically not existing anymore, right?
And the truth is, the collaboration that you are talking about, it can be between two OEMs. It can be honestly between two tier ones, or any mix of it. It can be the startup and an OEM, a startup and tier one in the old sense. So I think collaboration is the key word, where I think we have a common stake. The money is always there, but we also have a common stake in the outcome.
Exactly.
In partnerships, I mean, if I think about partnerships, it means to me actually that both talk on eye level, not like customer and supplier. Exactly. I mean, did it really change this in automotive? I have still the feeling that it's still like OEM and supplier. I mean, I'm not really sure if this is
not
changed.
At all. Not at all.
So it's moving away from a procurement relationship to a platform relationship, wherever that platform may be, right? There's multiple levels of the platform, but it's really, as I was saying, it's about providing together, working together collaboratively. I like the word, right? Collaboration, to create that solution, to solve a problem together, to be on the same page, and to create something together, not on your own. And like I said, 1, 2, 3, or multiple parties can come together. And I think we can talk to some of those examples of, how that has worked, how it hasn't worked, because there's good and bad of, there's a lot of partnerships, there's a lot of strategic partnerships, but they don't always last also. And I think maybe we could dive into later why they are successful, why they fail. So I think there's some very common threads there, but it's working together.
Yeah, and Fateh, you said, you see it's not changing much. I think I'll say two things. One is, it is starting to change, number one. And number two, it's the nature of it is changing. So for example, companies like Google, like Amazon, like Nvidia, these are the big technology corporations. They are now coming to play directly. And I think the relationship is no longer that high, somebody's high, somebody's low, because look at, my ex-employer, GM and Google, right? Well, GM technically is a client, okay? Google technically is a, provider for, the Android Auto and the whole, platform. But in reality, Google, GM doesn't have any market power to really control, let's say, Google, right? Because just Google is way too big. So I think the traditional relationship and the power play, okay, it's changing right there. That's one example, right? And in the other cases, for example, it's not necessarily just between OEM and somebody else. It could be between two other players, and I'll let Marcus speak on this alloy core, how between two companies, right? Vector on one hand, QNX is another, and why did they come together, for what kind of benefit, right? So I think it's again some mutual benefit that's at play here. But I'll stop there.
I mean, there's this one additional thing to that. I mean, Google or NVIDIA are new players in this area. Actually, they are quite new, and probably they can talk on eye level with the OEMs because but Vector is long in this business. I mean, I would like to see. I would like to hear actually from Vector side. How do you see this actually from? I mean, because you're, I don't know how many years in this business.
35, 36, 7.
Yeah.
Something.
And do you see this shift actually?
A lot. So I think I could not disagree more with your initial statement that this is still like a top-down approach somewhere. So
okay,
but it's not for a long time. So I think maybe 5 years ago this kind of changed, and so we have so many projects with OEMs, with tier ones, where we even have, let's say, mixed teams. So there are teams existing with employees from our collaboration partners, with our employees. We're working on the same repositories, and this is creating, of course, or was initially creating lots of challenges, right? So what's with the IP in shared repositories and so on. So there are many things which had to be clarified. But I would even say, right now today, this is even becoming kind of the standard. So nobody is well, nobody's also wrong, but there's a certain shift from just providing products to hey, we want to integrate, we want to build some programs together, we want to build a platform together, and this is exactly the root cause why we need all of these partnerships, because I think no company can claim, hey, we can do everything, right? So we have from the low-level hardware stuff up to all the AI cloud infrastructure, we can do everything. This nobody would believe. So all these partnerships are essential to do this, and I think this is one of the reasons why we're talking today.
Yeah, and the interesting dynamic also that's going on is each of those types of layers, I would say, within the ecosystem, traditional layers, like you said, they're all mixing now. They all have evolved, right? So each one of those, whether you're a semiconductor, and I can talk to that directly if we want to talk about it too, is how semiconductor vendors evolved, right? We're not just providing a chip and a board and documentation over to a tier one who builds a box, who sends it to the OEM, that linear model we talked about. But each one of those layers, if you look at how they've evolved, I would say in the last 10 years, because I started doing this in 2016 in driving towards SDV, and it's tremendous how much value each layer is providing. In a way, there was this whole squeeze. The tier ones felt like they're being squeezed from the bottom, and they're being squeezed from the top from the OEM. So that's an interesting dynamic of how the roles in the ecosystem and how those partnerships are. Each of the individual components are growing and doing more, but then together they do even more. There's a synergy on top of synergy. So I think there's a lot of dynamics there we could dive into.
I would like to go a little bit away from the OEM tier one, tier two, because we also see a lot of strategic partnerships which have entities haven't even talked to each other before, like exactly what Marcus said. It's like you got automotive talking to telecommunications, talking to AI, talking to cloud, and so on. And what we see there, so back in, like 20, 30 years ago, there was like partnerships between two car makers. So let's build a car together. But that's not what we talk about, because they both knew how to build a car. They just want to save costs. But now what we are seeing is they're going out. It's like, I want to do something new. I have absolutely no idea. It would take me 20 to 30 years to build intellectual property. So I find somebody who has that already and needs what I can do. So we have like this mutual relationship. So for example, me, as a car maker, I'm going to Waymo and I say, hey, you do build self-driving, I build cars. We merge that together and we have a product much, much faster because we bring the best from both worlds together, but we already have it. So that's a dynamic that is more recent in partnerships.
Yeah. In support of what Fateh originally said, that I'm not seeing too much change. I think the change is very much kind of it is variable. It's different in different car companies. It's different in different tier ones maybe. For example, yes, some car companies maybe they're still sticking to their old school mentality. Okay, I mean, you'll see that and that try to think that they're at the top of the food chain, right? But in other cases, and the other extreme example, recent example is VW and Rivian, right? I mean, VW, largest car company at that point, they decided they cannot really make it work in the sense that they were talking about. And in Rivian, I need a lot of cash because I'm really cash strapped. And they came together and on a partner basis, and now they have a VW Rivian Technologies as a separate group that they're working on, and it remains to be seen if they're successful. That's a different story, but I think this is something unique we are seeing, right? So it doesn't matter that VW is a very large company and Rivian is only making so many units of vehicles. They decided that they do understand something better than VW and they're coming together.
So it's interesting that because like 10, 15, 20 years ago, this would have been an acquisition or a merger, right? And that's the big difference. So a strategic partnership over acquisition and merger, right? So we're not just like eating up the other player because I'm the slightly, more equity company, but I'm actually going to work officially together and so on. So that's something, it's a little bit different now.
And that gives you the dynamics because a Rivian can move faster. They have they're set up differently, right? They're not burdened by the big corporate structure. So it's an interesting point. If they just acquired Rivian and put them into the organization of VW, would it be as successful, right? That would be a key thing because I think it's the best of both worlds because Rivian's getting the funding. They have the technology on the hardware, the architecture, the software that can be leveraged very quickly by a VW, which has the whole scale side. Now they can scale it out across a fleet of vehicles. So I think it's win-win for both. And I think it's another reason why a merger acquisition of it may not be as successful, right? That's the interesting dynamic, I think, between those two and how they're doing it may be the best way to do it right now.
And I think there's even like a technical reason for this because I think in the last few years, even the understanding of software changed a little bit because it's not just, hey, I acquire the software and then I have it. I mean, there's now the understanding it's terribly expensive also to maintain it, right? So it doesn't really make sense just to buy some IP and then you have it. Oh shit, what shall I do? I mean, now I need 20% more people just to make it run and fix it over the last few decades. And I think this is also the reason for the partnerships.
I have one just further question regarding this partnership. I mean, do we see, for example, differences in Europe, in America, and China? I mean, is this strategic partnership different in China than in Europe and USA? Because in automotive has a long tradition in Europe. We have the structures, supplier, and so this has a long. But in China, these new OEMs probably they start in a different way, and they deal also differently with suppliers, like partners also. Do you know, Marcos, I guess Vector is also in China, right? I mean, I guess, do you see any change between continents? I mean, how they work? Or is it same? I mean,
I think there are, of course, certain differences between the different markets. And I mean, China is still our, I think, third largest country we are currently in. So this is still a huge portion. The type of collaboration is a little bit different. So the style of working, but let's say the initial idea of let's do some partnerships, I would say is always somewhere the same because they're still facing the same problem. So if you are, and I think this is just driven by technology, right? So if an SDV is trying to be built, then you need to integrate from all of the domains. I mean, it is like in telecommunication, TV, cloud connected, smartphone-like, car thing.
Some automotive in there too.
Yeah.
No, of course, a huge part, but yeah, so it needs to be interdisciplinary.
Yeah, and it's interesting to watch how they grow their ecosystem, right? They have their own ecosystem that they leverage with Chinese vendors, and that's really developed over the last decade also.
And I think that
it was changing. Oh, sorry. Yep.
Well, go ahead.
No, this is which I thought might become a problem, let's say. But interestingly, this is in China for China, this buy local strategy and so on. I think at least we are not perceiving it as critical as you would read from the press. So in particularly, if there are, let's say, safety requirements for foreign OEMs and so on, then or even local OEMs in China that are trying to export to other markets, it's not that let's say European software is strictly forbidden or something. So this is still a very huge market for us.
Okay.
So another thing I observe in China is that they're because they all don't have a long legacy, so they are much quicker in reaching out to somebody who has already spent time to build up certain IP, and they're not digging within their own company or trying to build something they've never done before. So I've seen that definitely much happening quicker over there.
Yeah,
okay.
and so the relationship, the political, relationship between a Western market such as US and China, I think is also changing or impacting the partnership. I give an example. So General Motors has a function called Super Cruise, which is hands-free driving. Okay, and this was built in-house by GM. All right, now GM has a partnership with SAIC, Shanghai Automotive, something, right? But when GM wanted to take that, or rather Chinese partner wanted to bring the technology to China, there were lots of regulatory obstacles. Okay, so what GM did, they found a partner in China, which is a very good company called Momenta. Okay, and so GM formed a partnership with Momenta, and they are now the developer of the Super Cruise for China, and they have to develop a lot of it from scratch because a lot of data standards and APIs, nothing is transferable from US to China for trade related issues. Okay, so here is an example where a company is forced to go from in-house to a local partner, not necessarily because of their own strategic decision, but because that's how the cross-market relationship is structured.
And that also, Fatih, your question was before, what's the difference between those three large regions? But actually, one reason for strategic partnerships is that they actually want to go into a different region. They are not very established yet. And we see that, I mean, the same time Volkswagen and work together with Rivian, they also have a similar deal with Xiaopeng for the Eastern market, for the Asian market.
Right.
So because they realize it's like, okay, we cannot really, or we maybe should not do that all on our own, or we fail to do it all on our own. So, and that's why we actually talk with people who solved certain things.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think I see also a difference between the new players and the old players. I mean, NVIDIA, for example. I mean, it's almost dictating everybody in the automotive what to take and how to use. I mean, they don't say they don't want to sell anything. They would just say you have to do it in this way. I mean, and you have to pay us for that. You have to buy our GPUs and our software stack and everything. This is, I think, these new players like Google. I mean, Google, for example, announced yesterday that they open sourced their Android automotive SDV stack soon. I mean, I think this will change. This will be game changer. Yeah. It's not only IVI. It's not anymore infotainment system. They go for the whole SDV, and they're dictating. Actually, I mean, it's not anymore. Yeah. It's nice to have. You can take it. No, they say how software should be developed in the automotive. I think this is a completely different game, in my opinion.
So,
I mean,
yeah, NVIDIA is a very interesting example. Historically, they tried to initially, in their earlier attempts, they formed a lot of developmental relationship with many OEMs, in US, in Europe, in China, everywhere. But those are all developmental projects. So they basically say, take my, platform, run it. But then for that particular company, maybe the cost was not compatible, right? Because NVIDIA platforms are also very expensive. They are very powerful. They have lots of capabilities, but they're also expensive. So almost none of the developmental projects, they had about 20 such development, projects with 20 different OEMs of all kinds. None of them matured. Okay, maybe a few did, like Mercedes, maybe, but mostly they didn't. But now they have taken a complete different strategy. So they said, you know what? I have a platform which is complete. You get the software support as well. I'm open sourcing part of my AI framework to you. Okay, so you get the hardware, you get all the software that works with it, and by the way, you also get some developmental tools which I'm open sourcing now, right? So this is a new strategy, and I'm really curious to see what would happen. Will this lead to a lot of car companies adopting and going with NVIDIA partnership, or it hits some bottlenecks, right? Like cost. I don't need that much power. Maybe the entire platform is way too powerful for my need, right? I think we have not seen that play out yet. We've seen the first part A, where the developmental projects did not mature into series production, but now we are seeing NVIDIA has changed its strategy, its partnership strategy, right? Now it's saying, I'll give you lots of stuff. It's a complete end-to-end solution. So let's see how it goes.
Yeah, I categorize these into 3 buckets, and really Qualcomm and NVIDIA are that first bucket, right? Complete stack. So I think you have to talk about Qualcomm. So I think Qualcomm has even much larger penetration. So so I would say that's the full stack implementers. Then you have the ones like where I came from, NXP, and Infineon's doing some of this too. It's I would say it's the integration, right? They're integrating. They're working with the vectors. They're working with the EVs. They're working with the OS vendors. They're doing execution environments. They're not doing the whole stack. It's not here, take it or leave it. Here's our stack. It gives you the ability to do what you want to do. And then there's others that are more just providing enablement and maybe not providing as much. There's 3 clear buckets, I think, in that. And I would group, I think, Qualcomm, NVIDIA in that first camp, which is the the full stack. And then the interesting thing, you talk about NVIDIA and Qualcomm in China, for example. You have Horizon Robotics. You have several other companies coming on, and that's what I'm saying. The ecosystem is changing rapidly there. You may not see it, but it's happening, and they are starting to replace things in China with China for China approach. So you'll start to see more and more of that ongoing. And they have their own ecosystem developing, basically. So,
okay. But I mean, staying with the semiconductors, I mean, this is really one good example of for the reasons for these partnerships, and in the end, this is also some cost saving, right? So, what we are currently doing with many of the semiconductors is we are combining forces to commonly develop the MCAL for the different chips, so all the drivers, because before there were drivers from us, there were drivers from them, and then you need to purchase some parts here, purchase some parts there. And if there's only one, let's say, common development, in the end, of course, this is saving money, right? And I mean, this is with all these cost pressure, nobody can tell right now, hey, we don't have cost pressure, right? Everyone has it. So this is one answer.
But this is also connected to standardization, actually. I mean, if you have a standard hardware where you can say, okay, we have one chip architecture, one whatever hardware platform, then people can build on that. Companies can build and provide also a standard solution. But what I have seen in automotive is every ECU generation is different, because you have a different chip vendor, you have a different, hardware vendor. I mean, I think standardization is here key. But I don't see so much effort here. I don't know. I mean, if you guys know,
see standardization. Standardization can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, and it can be at different layers of.
No, hardware standardization. Hardware standardization.
I don't see that's necessary. I don't see direction. I mean, standardization at the API or at the layers, like a HAL layer or an application layer, makes a lot of sense. And then the stuff underneath, you adapt it to that. I don't see, from a semiconductor vendor to align that, I don't see that happening or momentum towards that direction at all.
Okay.
One thing I think you touched on, maybe someone did, I think you made cost, right? Everything's becoming cost sensitive, right? And we're seeing that's the biggest pressure. One of the biggest pressures I'm seeing now from customers is that they're looking at, how do I scale, right? It's easy to create an SDV for a $100,000 vehicle, right? Or 80,000, the high end. But you can see the problem with the EVs, right? The EVs trying to get down hard enough. But think about an SDV. To do that in a cost scalable way without tearing it up and starting from scratch, that is a huge issue right now, is scalability. So it's something they really need to think about. You can design a high-end thing, but if you can't scale that and leverage your software investment and think about the big picture, that's a big problem that's going to start popping up in SDVs. And we're starting.
Yeah, and Brian, this is a very critical point. In fact, it's more critical than it seems. And because of the following, I mean, all the first generation of SDVs that we are seeing all at the high end.
Exactly.
I mean, whether it's from GM or from Mercedes or from BMW, they all are priced very high, right? So, and that's one thing. And second thing is, you might say, you know what, like if I'm a large, mass market company and I have developed a, expensive premium SDV based product, I'll say, you know what, I already know how to do it. I'll just dumb it down. You cannot do that.
No,
You
scale.
cannot start with a premium platform and scale it down. That does not happen. So you almost have to do a ground up, separate, scalable product that you can
exactly. That's what I'm saying, right? And that's very costly.
Yeah.
It's very costly. That's like starting a whole new project and not being able to leverage your investment, which is a major problem with the industry right now.
Right, and I think the industry will be forced to start a new series of partnerships that we have not seen yet, because at some point in time, we have to address that part of the market, and that part of the market also have to have these technologies. You cannot sell, a cheap, 20-year-old engineering car to just because you want to sell a cheap car, right? I mean, low cost should not mean cheap. It still means you have to have all the latest technology. And how do you scale it down in a sense that's more affordable? I think that question is still not answered.
Exactly. That's a key problem I think we need to address. I mean, we've seen some of China with how some of the scalability issues, they're always way ahead in a lot of areas, but that's an area that they've been looking and addressing more, I think. But it goes to also the experience. So if an OEM has an experience it wants to provide across its fleet, it can do it easily in a high-end Mercedes, but what about a lower class Mercedes that's very cost sensitive, right? The C class or a lower level, you want to keep the consistency, but if you can't afford to do that, that's a problem, right? I think that's a universal problem for all OEMs that have to deal with that, because they don't want to have a low-end car, like you said, that looks like a 20-year-old vehicle, right? That doesn't fit their brand.
Do we have, for example, some successful partnerships at the moment in place, and what are the values these partnerships bring? I mean, can you just mention some existing partnerships where we see the value what this partnership brings at the end? I mean, do you have any examples for that?
Yeah, I mean, Porter, you already mentioned, like, for example, the Alloy Core partnership, which is quite prominent right now, and I mean. This is something we did exactly to create this huge increase in value for the customers. And for example, this is really lowering the integration effort, and this is, I think, a huge aspect of all these partnerships, because just bringing together a few things, it's not that easy anymore, because they are very complex right now. You have all individual safety manuals, safety cases, and so on. Performance optimization, you have multiple logging systems in there. So pre-integration, in order to reduce the integration effort and increase the performance. This is also something which is never really mentioned, right? It's if you integrate 20 different pieces, they might work somehow, but not optimal. I mean, bringing this to an optimal point, this takes really, really a long time. And this is exactly the answer why we did this, because we were collaborating with QNX for a very long time, just project per project. And then we said, why do we do the same work over and over and over and over again? It's much, much easier if we do it one time properly, and then everyone can benefit. And this is
because we used to do it. I mean, this is this reason,
exactly.
Because we used to do it, I mean.
Exactly. And then it was just natural. Of doing it.
Yeah. I think I've seen that trend too, but in the past it was difficult to get all of the AUTOSAR and such, for example, to be optimized for the platform, because generically, or I guess, an AUTOSAR vendor has to go across so many platforms, so they're not invested in each one. But when you start, I think the new trend I'm seeing is what you're saying, is that now they're actually being optimized at a platform level. And now you're doing integration, execution environments, they're actually optimized. So that's an advantage you're going to get from SDV, where in the old days, you were getting implementations that were not necessarily optimized as much, because the vendors, they didn't have the motivation or economically viable to do that level across the board. But with the reuse now and execution environments across multiple processors or cores within these integration processors, whether they're zones or central compute, your investment actually, it goes across all of those. It's consistent and it's reused. And I think that's a whole dynamic that people don't think about it. Maybe is the reuse and how that changes the economics of the development and the efficiency of the development and the cost savings of the development. All of those come together, which is very different than in the past.
Right. And I think on just to continuing those thoughts, and we discussed this yesterday at the standardization, different context, the standardization discussion. And one thing we talked about is that a lot of, again, this is about not partnership directly, but about standard. Why am I adopting standardization, standardized platform? And one of the things is an economic necessity. So a lot of partnerships are happening, okay, successful partnerships or otherwise, they are happening because, I can manage the cost, right? And therefore, I'm gravitating towards an option where I can actually adopt something. So that's kind of point number one. Point number two is, in the auto industry, and we all know that, traditionally, everything, whether you are vertically or horizontally integrated doesn't matter, but being proprietary was like a thing, right? I would like to do this my way. And even for simple things, like the car companies would develop 20 different designs of steering wheel, although everybody drives the same steering wheel, right? So that's kind of an example where you kind of overdo this proprietary thing. I think the cost of the new development is really forcing the car companies to think through this notion that proprietary is not that important, number one. And the number two is whenever I'm collaborating or whenever I'm going away from the transactional relationship to a more of an equal or not equal, unequal, whatever, partnership, there is a sense that, I need to protect my IP or of some kind. And if somebody gets access to that, I'll be losing. And which is like like if I win, somebody else loses. And that was the framework. And I think now there is a sense that there are other choices where both you and I can gain, this idea of plus sum rather than a zero sum, where both partners actually gains equally. I think that's a cultural and mindset change. I'm not saying that has happened, but I'm beginning to see a little bit, sparks here and there where car companies are beginning to talk about that. So we are seeing, say, a much bigger participation, for example, in Eclipse, initiative, where a lot of OEMs, and in fact, my ex-employer GM, they actually jumped into it big time originally, but then of course, they have a lot of leadership changes, and then they pulled back, sadly, right? But at least, there was a spark. There was an example where even this company, which never did this before, they said, hey, we have to do it because we don't have all the answers. So I think that requirement, the economic necessity and the idea that I don't have all the IPs is also coming forward. And I hope your question was examples of successful partnership. And I'm sure there are several, but I think that is the fundamental basis for a potential successful partnership.
So I want to take it a few levels higher, not quality-wise urgently, but integration-wise. Something that's more visible also to the end customer. One brand new partnership we just seen here in Vegas is Zoox and Uber, which is a perfect example. It's like one has a solution, but no customer. The other one has the customer network, and they're desperately looking for more drivers. So this is like a super mutual connection where there's a win-win. There's absolutely no real downside on either side. Another one that comes to mind is Amazon and Rivian. I'm not sure if they're driving around in Germany, those vans here, but over here, Amazon is 100% Rivian vehicles now, every delivery truck. Amazon never had the plan to build a car, and Rivian never wanted to build a global shipping network, right? So there's absolutely no overlap, but it's 100% fit, and both of them have immediate benefit.
Yeah. Complementary, right? Complementary value proposition.
Yeah, and then Lucid just announced that with Uber also a week or two ago at their investor day. So yeah, I mean, that's the trend we're seeing is these things are partnering because they're providing the transportation to achieve business goals, right? Whether it's ride share or transportation or whatever, right? So
Uber, of course, is kind of stretching it to a maximum. They actually have 20 different contracts with everybody.
They only provide the network. But I want to go on to something else. Partha, what you are saying, intellectual property. This is something a lot of in old school ways, like, oh my God, I have to protect my intellectual property. And then it's the question, what is your intellectual property? And we had this in this talk a few months ago. If I give all of you the same specification and you write code for me, is that your intellectual property? I don't think so. I mean, it's you just like put into code what I asked you to put into code. There might be certain things you might do differently, but in the end, this utterly protecting way of handling intellectual property is actually slowing you down tremendously. Even though there's from technical point of view not always, and Marcus, I agree, there are certain little things you might want to black box in there, but in general, to protect stuff that is very obvious, where every software developer could reverse engineer it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to directly add here, I mean, at least for us, I would really agree, because we're shipping our code since 30 years just as source code. We never black box anything. So we also don't believe that the secret is somewhere in the code. It's more or less, of course, we think we have a very good implementation, right? But I mean, it's more in the process, how you do it, how can you adapt with the change, how can you build it for all these OEMs and so on. It's not really directly in the code, and I think this is undoubtedly true for many customers.
And in this regard, I think there is a legal angle also to it. Okay,
liability.
And legal angle, by legal angle, I mean, and I've seen this play in real time, and I give you an example. Okay. This is long back, maybe 10 years back, at least 10, right? There was a time when, a certain OEM was adopting a Linux-based OS, open source OS, which was from a distributor. They have distributors, right? The Linux software, even though it's open source, they still have distributors who maintain, etc., right? And the OEM was, and its legal team, which is very much, schooled in the old definition of IP in that sense, they genuinely thought that, there is I don't have to give anything and I get something free. It's available, I just go grab it, right? And then as they were going through the process of adoption, all the open source foundation rules started to, come to play. And then they realized that, yes, I can acquire the, open source, but then I am also I have some responsibility and accountability, and I'm also required to put my own IP again. So it's a different kind of IP management. And this was completely, foreign to a traditional car company. But between then and now, almost 10 years have passed. I think that the companies have hired more lawyers who have come from the technology space and the traditional brick and mortar, IP protection. I think that it has become a little bit more sophisticated now. So I think the industry in general and the car companies in particular, I think they're becoming a little bit more sophisticated. I'm not saying they're there, but I think they figure out that there is a possibility where we have to manage it differently.
I think it depends who you're talking to in those companies. I think there's definitely some people who figured it out, and there's definitely some people who haven't yet.
True, 100%. It's not universal. Not universal, so, not yet.
If I may, I would, because I really want to answer this question, not have an answer from you guys for this question. What are the biggest reasons SDV partnerships fail? So we talk about what they should do, but what are examples and reasons why they fail?
I mean, I have to answer it in an abstract sense. I don't have an example to go at. But I think expectation is very, number one reason where, I go out and kind of assume that I will do certain things and I'll get this kind of support from that partner or whoever, the vendor. And then they realize that it's not really exactly like this, right? And that's part of the reason. And the example that I gave, which is not quite, it's framed differently, because that was somebody trying to adopt a open source Linux, but it didn't work. Eventually that fell apart. I think they adopted it for one generation and then it went away, right? Because again, the expectation played a role. And I think with respect to SDV, software defined vehicle, first of all, for many OEMs, they are basically in the catch-up mode. They are doing it not because they thought 5 years back that it's a great strategy, but now they are doing it because they think that the other guy is doing it, number one. And number two, I can deliver certain things which is so popular, something like over there update, okay, right? And my company, literally 2014, I used to get requests to kind of give them what Tesla is doing. What is this OTA? Why they are doing it, right? And so that was not a common, it was not like common knowledge, and nobody of course knew how to do it, or at least did not know how to do it in a scaled up fashion. Okay. I mean, I had vehicles in my company that could do over there update for a very specific part back in 2010. Okay. We had vehicles, and I still remember, okay, this is so long back. I remember I would get a note saying that your HVAC system is update.
Dial-up modem.
Yeah. Make sure you keep the car, in a place which has access, clean sky above it and all that, right? But they did not know how to scale it up.
Yeah.
Right? It's a completely new
Or
capability.
they didn't see the need. I mean, that's the other option.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many things that go on with these, these big, huge announcements, strategic announcements. We're working together to do this, and a lot of them fail. I think 50%, something lower, fail, but a lot of it is, strategic alignments, priorities change, but it's really, I think, comes down to execution. And do they actually have a real plan? You still deal with silos at OEMs, and those cause some complexity. But the ones that actually, I think, are successful, like what Marcos was saying about the ones that they're very well aligned, they have KPIs, they have shared teams, they're co-located, they have an execution plan. It's not just a vision and a press release, but it actually has something behind it. And it comes down to how you execute. Because I've seen a lot of these types of things, and they fail almost always because they're not aligned, they're not co-executed as a team, right? Instead, it's more of a press release and a partner, but it's not a joint solution, and it's not executed properly. I think that's the key things that kill a lot of those types of initiatives.
Yeah, and those agreements are usually done by the management or by the upper management of those companies. And I think one reason why they fail is because their actual IP, which is the engineers, actually go away, because it's like, hey, I went to San Francisco to work in Silicon Valley, not to work for Ford or General Motors or any other company which just acquired us. So in the end, there's a certain risk when you buy such not buy, but partner with such a company, that you actually partner with an empty hull, because the engineers who are working there not interested in that.
Yeah, and companies change. I think one of the examples that's a lot noted on things that kind of fell apart was I think Amazon and Stellantis. They had the smart cockpit, and it was like they announced it 2 years later, 2.5 years later, something. They said we're going to go our own ways, right? Their strategic, their strategies diverged a little bit, and it just fell apart. So that's where it needs to be something that is very tight, cohesive throughout the whole way in execution. It's not something that just changes in 2 to 3 years because your corporate strategy changed. And sometimes you can't help that, right? You have priorities that change, but those, a lot of times I've seen these types of engagements where people get really involved initially, and then it kind of gets silent for a while, and then just dies because they shift in different directions. So that
is then an advantage of partnership over merger and acquisition, right? So if it really doesn't work for both sides, you can just like part ways and go your own.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and the other thing is, a lot of the partnerships don't work out because there is really no commitment, from either parties. Okay, I mean, locally, I have to give a non-software, very traditional hardware example, I think, but the point remains the same. So, for example, GM and Ford, they are local, competitor, right? They have had lots of partnerships through the years. There was one particular in my tenure where they created a powertrain system, like a 12 shift engine powertrain, right? But I don't think there was any long-term strategy behind it. It was like a one-off situation, and
There was more a deal, not really a strategic partnership.
Yeah. So, but recently, so this was way back when, right? But right now, there is a new partnership that has been formed in Europe. I think it's between Renault and Geely. Okay, they have formed a 50-50 partnership or JV to develop engines. Basically, they said, the engines are not that critical strategic component of a car anymore, and the new age consumers, they need other stuff. And they formed a partnership. They said, we'll just outsource it, and they formed this company called Horse, like the horse
powertrain.
Yeah, I think it's called Horse. Yeah. So the goal of Horse is to develop a powertrain or engine for these companies, and I think they also have plans to sell it to other companies who might say, I can't develop an engine by myself, and it's not that critical. Consumers are not looking for big power and horsepower and all that. So I might as well take it from an outside source. I think this is the first time really in the industry, and where they actually have a goal and a long-term commitment that we don't want to invest internally anymore in a component which may not have a long lifetime anymore anyway. By 2040, who knows? I hope they don't exist anymore, right? But so I think times have changed. People, if partnerships have a commitment, and I assume Geely and Renault have some kind of long-term plan here, but without commitment, partnerships don't work. I've seen that.
But how does it work actually if OEMs partner? I mean, because OEMs are potentially, they have concurrent products. I mean, they want to sell their own cars and so on. But if we look on partnerships between OEMs, how would this work? I mean, where's the IP there?
You've seen
where's the IP
rebadged
there?
Cars all over the world. I mean, when you look at Opel, Vauxhall, and any other like car here, Buicks and so on, these are all the same cars. Different companies are just rebadged. So it's basically like you do this middle class, I do the smaller one, and so on. Anyway, I want to put a cut here and let Marcus talk because we were all talking over him. Go for it.
No, I just wanted to add, let's say, one more thing, which was not talked about yet for failure of partnerships. And I think this is the adaptability to process. Because, I mean, of course, everyone agrees, hey, let's work together. And then you're putting some code, and then it starts, hey, I'm doing the review. No, unit. I mean, this is my coding guideline. No, I'm not using your code guideline. And I mean, then it's starting, and you need to really figure out, and this is a compromise, right? You need to maybe mix something, and then every company has maybe a process for developing ASLD with some reviews and some checks and some forms, and it doesn't fit to the others. So and there you need to have some compromises, and this is really taking a long time. The easiest way is if one company takes, let's say, the lead and says, okay, this is my process, my stuff, my infrastructure, let's do it all. But then I would doubt maybe it's not that big of a partnership. Maybe someone is just a guest.
Do you want to be in the other company then?
No. I mean, that's really one way I was thinking too, that you divide it in such so you not have to mix things, right? And you have this part, this layer that they're responsible, this layer that they're responsible, and taking the best of each of them and bringing those together in a way. But you're right. There's
interface.
There's process, there's silos, there's culture. All those things come into play that work against you, right? So
exactly. Yeah. And humans are, of course, bound to the usual behavior, right? And if there's a change, it's of course a little bit difficult. So this is one of the biggest risks, I would say.
Yeah, I think when you say process, Marcus, also I think Brian mentioned that culture is also a kind of an equal part of that. I mean, you have your process, but the process is also a reflection of the culture of that company. And now when two partners are coming together, I mean, did they decide that I'll adopt your process or you adopt my process? And I think how I think about my entire product development, what's my culture, it becomes a a
Yes.
big factor. And I know, for example, Honda and General Motors, they have partnered together for their Honda's first generation of electric car. Okay. And but the fact is, it did not really survive, after the first generation.
Yes.
And I don't have all the details, but I know that cultural differences were a part of one factor that kind of influenced the long term, or rather the lack of long term continuation of that.
Right.
And
Renault
Honda
Nissan, same thing, right? Same thing.
So before we get to that question, I've seen companies, especially in Silicon Valley, where the culture is for the employees the number one retention reason. So as soon as the culture shifts slightly, they move on, and their mindset is different than the mindset that they like you have going for the golden watch for 25 years in the same company, right? So if you bring a different culture into especially a startup style company, you have this, and as I mentioned earlier, you have this huge risk of losing the actual intellectual property, not the code, the people who write it or wrote it. So, yeah. But yeah, Buddy, you want to
one more point before going to the question,
go for it.
Because I think it's not even the culture of the company. This is also the country culture, I would say. And here this is no more my personal observation, but I would perceive for example, the German culture really as a drawback in collaboration, because even if you're going to new SDVs, new ideas, there is a strong tendency to say, the last 20 years I did it like this, and everyone wants to discuss. So in a company, everyone has an opinion, everyone tries to have an impact on the change and so on, and therefore these projects, in my opinion, tend to take a little longer. Let's say in contrast to an Indian project we did, where it was super clear. The boss decided we go this way, everyone's nodded, yes, we do this, and then done. No discussion at all. They just focused on one goal. This was absolutely amazing to see, and the project was done in 2.5 years. So this was not even the company, this was really country culture, and not really sure if the German culture here is really the best.
Yeah, I mean, you look at
long-term
China,
quality, right? not fast development.
I mean, of course. But,
you look at China and iteration. They do so many iterations. They'll do 2 or 3 iterations in the time of a European, potentially in some cases, and they learn from iterations, right? And so I don't think those are trade-offs that a lot of people are willing to take, right? There's risk, there's trade-offs, so it's an interesting dynamic there, right?
We just a couple of minutes left, actually. I mean, I cannot believe that the time is already over. But I just wanted to take one question here from Andrew. I mean, he thinks that a very detailed RASIC would be very important in partnerships to have the sales and warranty responsibilities. Have you seen this somewhere in any partnership?
Yes, I mean, especially in more traditional setup companies. I think it's great to know exactly who's doing what, but I have also seen a big downside. And this is, if that doesn't say I do that, I'm not going to do it. And that slows you down tremendously. And unfortunately, I have seen that a lot. And it's like, this is not on my, that's not my paycheck. It's not my job description. And that's exactly not the kind of culture you want to have when you want to accelerate.
But this sounds very German, actually. I mean,
yes.
This is also the reason why it
might not work.
I know the German culture might be not that smart, but I mean, I think if you have the RASIC table, right, assigning, let's say, your individual characters in each entry, I think this is very simple, right? And this creates some clarity. But I mean, when you're starting this partnership at the beginning, it's very fuzzy. So what kind of roles do you put in there? What kind of tasks do you want to split at all? So I think if you really have elaborated in the partnership that far that okay, it's this task, this, at that point you usually don't need the RASIC anymore, because you are more or less done with structuring everything.
The point where you clash is actually when you have 2 people equally qualified and equally empowered to do the same thing on both sides, and then you have actually a challenge.
Yeah. Hey, I was going to say, Sean made a comment, kind of going back to the powertrain side. It's extremely expensive, so it makes sense, especially what Partha was saying, that's not the differentiating thing sometimes, right? It's other things now. But for SDV, do you guys see that eventually? SDV is very expensive, right? Also, but do you see some of this becoming a common platform? Because at some point, I think there's things that OEMs could do if they want to control the experience, they want to try the outward, user experience to customers, the customer relationship, the data, various aspects, but they don't care under the covers, right? We talk about non-differentiating. Most of this is non-differentiating. So do you see us getting to a place where you do have, a consistent thing that would benefit everyone? If the OEMs manage this in such a way where OEMs actually are working together to make this happen, everyone would benefit. The ecosystem and all the apps and everything on top would benefit. But do you see it happening? There's so much legacy, and maybe that takes another generation of automotive executives to make that happen. But I think that's going to have to go at some point.
Yeah, but I do see that possibility, happening in the industry. This you just mentioned, this idea of non-differentiating software. It's a new concept. Okay, I mean, like I said, auto industry is always very proprietary, but I think there is a awareness. There are certain things I probably don't need, and I don't need to build. That is myself, because it's like a brick, right? No matter whatever your house design is or whatever house you build, you still need bricks, and it's no point designing and building a brick by yourself, right?
I don't really want anything bricks in my car, though.
The SDV context, I think the foundational software becomes important, and I think I can see that there is some awareness going on in a slightly different context. And Brian, you are very close to this, company like, again, GM is a very old school company, or was in some sense, but they are big time into supporting this idea of this marketplace, the SDVARS marketplace, where the idea is that I'll just go into a marketplace and I'll adopt a particular piece of software. I don't have to develop it myself. And I think that's an acknowledgement of this idea of a foundational or non-differentiating piece of software that I know my consumers will not look at, touch, or experience. Okay, I mean, what I offer, the branding and the differentiated experience, doesn't need that piece of software. So I think there is already an awareness in many different sense, and in fact that is the core idea of all the consortiums we are seeing, the new consortiums. And again, the marketplace is another example of the same very idea.
I think this is a good end, actually. I mean, the time is unfortunately over. I cannot believe. But I think we need to continue this conversation. I mean, we need a second or third episode, I guess. I mean, if you all want to join. But thanks for joining. I mean, it was really great. I mean, it ended now. I mean, I think we already reached the one hour. I think we can continue this conversation for several hours, but we have to stop somewhere. Thanks for joining. Thanks for the questions, and it was a pleasure. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.